Have you ever questioned if you're in God's will? Have you ever noticed a little anxiety come up within you, even a little analysis paralysis that keeps you stuck because you don't want to make the wrong move, the move that's outside of God's will? Well, if that is you, then this video is definitely for you. I'm going to actually answer the question that has been haunting many Christians. Why do I constantly question if I'm in God's will? And how can I actually have a peace knowing that He will direct me? And I don't have to have analysis by paralysis. Now, at the end of this video, I'm actually going to share the one very unexpected blessing that will definitely develop an assurance in God, and you will not struggle in the same way to doubt whether you're in God's will or not. I grew up in a church culture that had very strong teachings on this is right, this is wrong, very much black and white. Not a lot of talk of the gray or the tension. If the struggle of the tension was brought up, it was not welcomed. The leader had almost a formulaic approach that if you follow X, Y, and Z right, it'll deem you acceptable with God and acceptable with others if you follow these rules. Now, this is where things got interesting, is that I ended up leaving that church culture and moved states to New York City. I was on my own for the first time. I was making my own decisions. And I started to notice that while I was living in New York, I would approach decisions to make. I started to notice a little anxiety actually would well up within me, a little bit of an anxiousness or a fear that was I doing the right thing? Was I in God's will? I began to really question that a lot. And if I do make a decision, will God actually bless it because it's within His will or not? I had a lot of analysis by paralysis. I would be stuck that maybe my flesh was too strong and that if I made a decision out of my own flesh or my own self, then God definitely wouldn't bless it. And so it was almost like a guessing game. I remember one night I had a very, very sobering conversation with myself. And I said, God, I don't want to make the wrong step. Am I actually too strong for you? I don't hear your voice loud and clear. So how do I know what to do? Now, thankfully, while I was in New York, God did not leave me in this place. He definitely rescued me from this place because confusion is definitely not of God. Confusion is not a place of God, almost like a tool that God uses for us to try harder in our own strength to be better or to figure out what He wants. But I'll share towards the end of the video how He ended up rescuing me. So watch the entire video for the end. See, what happened was I came to the bottom of it, and the reason why I struggled was because I actually wasn't taught to think for myself. Whenever I had questions, I was always taught to go to a leader or a parent because they know best. I didn't learn to go directly to Scripture to wrestle with God for the answer, wrestling with God for deeper, tougher topics. And when I had doubts, it was definitely not encouraged to bring before leadership or parent. Too much pressure that was put on my own efforts to get it right. See, the reason I bring all this up is I think a lot of Christians have either experienced this at one time or maybe even experiencing it right now. And if they actually had a sobering conversation with themselves, they actually would think the same thing. Am I too strong for God? Is my flesh too much that God can't handle me because I haven't heard strong confirmation if I'm doing the right thing? A sign of a very emotionally healthy leader is a leader that actually can set aside their position, their ego, to actually encourage others to go directly to God for the answers. And I think this is a muscle that needs to be exercised in the church. It's not been exercised enough. Absolutely. First, God can speak to you, definitely in a loud voice on stage, or He can speak in a still, quiet voice. There can be powerful breakthroughs that can happen on a random Tuesday night when you're alone in your room, or there can be powerful breakthroughs absolutely at a conference. I think the key is, and I think and the reason I bring this up is I think a lot of Christians, they struggle with this as well, in this place of constantly analyzing, am I doing the right thing? Putting way too much pressure on their own strength, on their own abilities, and not looking to God for confidence that He indeed will direct, and that they can rest assured that He will direct or even redirect if they're not heading down the path that He wants. That if you're fully submitted to God, you're fully surrendered to God, you ask the Holy Spirit to come in and direct your life, then He indeed will direct you. That you actually can trust you. And it's not some crazy worldly thing. Oh, I put trust in myself and in myself alone. No, it's that you can trust you. Why? Because God is actually working through you. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God, it is not your strength, but it is God who is at work in you to will and to act in order to fulfill your purpose for His good pleasure." Now I want to talk about what I touched on at the beginning of this video, the unexpected blessing that produced within me, and it'll produce within you definitely a great assurance and a confidence in God that He indeed will direct you, and you don't have to live in a place of confusion, and you don't have to live in a place of constantly monitoring your every move. And here's the unexpected blessing. It is challenge. It is absolutely hardship. Let me explain. So while I was living in New York, God in His grace and His mercy did not leave me in that place of confusion, but actually pulled me out. He asked me to leave New York City. He asked me to leave the network that I worked so hard to build. He asked me to leave the friends group. He asked me to leave the place that I absolutely loved. I told myself that I would live in New York City for the rest of my life and actually move to Dallas. While I was in Dallas, I was so unhappy. I constantly asked and questioned, how can I be in God's will if I don't see any blessings? I didn't even want to be there. How can this be in God's will if I'm just not happy? But I will say that while I was in Dallas, He actually led me to a 12-step program that totally radically transformed my character. And He gave me the strong desire for emotional health for churches that is now my direction and my purpose in life that I still talk about today, and I still see the fruit from that time. But it was definitely a very hard season. Let's talk about the unexpected blessing of challenge, or the wall, that strengthens our trust in God in a whole unexpected way, trusting in God in ways that we've never been able to before. Quote from the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, author Pete Cesaro. But it is a truth about the Christian life that at one point or another, you'll actually hit a wall. And by a wall, I'm referring to a season in your faith when you get stuck. For most of us, the wall appears through a crisis that turns our world upside down. And it comes perhaps through a divorce, a job loss, a death of a close friend, or even a family member. It's a dryness or a loss of joy in our relationship with God. We question ourselves, God, the church, the Christian disciplines that have served us up until this time. It actually no longer works. We can't see what God is doing, and we see little visible fruit in our lives. There is so much beauty in the wall during going through challenging times. Now, the key is to push through. Do not jump ship. Do not leave the course, but stay the course. The reason, though, is because, yes, absolutely, it will turn your world upside down. You begin to question everything. And those religious or those self-righteous religious formulas that we used to apply before, those Christian disciplines that we used to apply before that got us acceptance with others, and we thought maybe it even got us acceptance with God, it actually doesn't work in the wall. And God then begins to strip away that we have a whole new depth and a whole new authenticity to our walk with Christ, and that we start to see that we can't rely on ourselves to lead us, but we have to rely on God's grace. We have to rely on God's sovereign hand to lead and to guide us during this time, because it's like we're in a dark tunnel and we don't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. All we can do is trust. And I will say that during that time in Dallas, I spent a lot of alone time, and I actually, for the very first time, learned how God actually uniquely spoke to me. And I experienced His grace in the most powerful way that I had never experienced before. And as I began to question while I was going through this time, I was like, God, how in the world are you using this for my good? Because I do not see it at all. But now looking back, absolutely, I can see how He used that time for radical transformation. And He ended up making great sense out of something that didn't make sense to me at all. But I do remember that I actually fell on my face one night and I cried out, God, please, please, please forgive me for ever thinking that I was too strong for you, that I was actually leading my own life out of my own strength. Please forgive me. Because it was in that moment that I realized that God actually was leading me the whole time. It was His hand that was turning all this mess into great beauty. Because of that time in Dallas, now today, I actually really don't struggle with that place of confusion, of constantly analyzing or doubting if I'm in God's will or not, or if I'm making the right decisions or not. Why? Because I have a stronger, deeper trust in Him, and I actually have a confidence in God, that God is indeed working through me. So if I pray about something, pray about a decision to make, and I might not necessarily hear immediately a direction or step to take from God, I know that I can actually move forward in confidence, because He will indeed redirect my steps if it's not within His will. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will prevail."